On a chilly winter's day this week, about 80 people stepped off two buses and into a muddy farmyard just off Kaituna Valley Road on Banks Peninsula. The farm visit was organised by the genetics team at Beef and Lamb New Zealand. Cosmo Kentish Barnes was there too, and pleased as punch he'd remembered his gumboots. First up, he's with Matt Iremonger.
We're at Williston Farms, which I manage with a whole group of staff. We're a sheep, beef and dairy business. We are about 6,500 hectares and irrigated flat land, dry land and hill country.
And how many stock do you run here on the farm?
We run 1,600 dairy cows, 12,000 ewes, 3,000 hoggets and finishing lambs obviously out of those. But over 1,000 Angus cows and finishing stock, and we do a bit of cropping. And
today you are hosting the field day for the Sheep Breeders Forum, and in fact everyone's just arrived.
That's right. So unfortunately with the bad weather we were unable to make it into the forum yesterday, but we're hosting here today, and and unfortunately still another bad weather day, but nonetheless there's a good crowd here.
It's pretty chilly and wet and windy.
Yep, I reckon you can smell the penguin shit coming off the sea. It's pretty awful.
Now, you're running two Hill Country Future Partnership projects. Tell me about them.
That program has finished now, but that ran for 3 years, and our part of it was trialling legumes on hill country, especially lucerne, and looking at the cost of developing lucerne on hill country and the improved dry matter production that could be achieved.
And I guess those projects will be of interest to a lot of the people here today.
Well, we've got some big challenges in the sheep industry at the moment. It's a difficult space. It is cyclically at the bottom at the moment, and it will recover, but we've got to find ways of producing the product more cheaply to allow us to have some sort of financial sustainability.
Now everyone's huddled up in a large shed here because, as I've mentioned, it's wet and cold here. And I am with Dr. Jason Archer from Beef and Lamb New Zealand.
Yeah, so I'm head of genetics, so essentially I guess I sort of lead the genetics team, and the genetics team does the sheep evaluation, so the sheep breeding values, and we also work in beef too in terms of genetics and extension for beef genetics too.
Yes, and how often does this forum happen?
We try and run them every couple of years. Last one was 2021, and actually it got cancelled because we were an hour into it and we had a COVID case, so thank goodness we're past those days. But yeah, try and get them done every couple of years. It's 3 years since the last one in this case, but yeah.
Yes. So what's on the schedule today?
So today we're on the field component of what we've had a 2-day event, and essentially the audience is sheep stud breeders in New Zealand that run their data analysis through Beef and Lamb's Genetics Centre. And of course there's some industry professionals that help those breeders as well. So it's really a gathering of sheep genetics and sheep breeders. And
what are some of the key topics on this year's agenda?
So a lot of it's updates as to changes that we might have made in the evaluation, some education around how we approach making the whole data set hang together so we can make good comparisons right across the industry, which is really important for us and for the industry. And we've had talk about, I talked a little bit about what's happening internationally in genetics. So it's really a chance for that, but also really importantly, it's a chance for all of our breeders to get together, to network, to talk about common problems, to ask us questions, but also to ask questions of each other, and, generally advance the cause of sheep breeding in New Zealand.
Can you explain to our listeners about the benefits of genetic improvements for the sheep industry?
Yeah, the benefits are actually huge. Several years ago in a previous job, I was actually involved in analysing how much the genetics has contributed to our industry, and we looked at the improvement. I think it was from 1991 through to 2015 at that time, so a 25-year period, and we know that the sheep industry productivity increased markedly over that time, and we could attribute 51% of that improvement was enabled by genetics. it's not just genetics, obviously, the total improvement, but genetics really is an enabler. It's enabled us to get more fertility into our flocks. It's enabled us to grow our lambs to heavier carcass weights without going over fat. So those core components, genetics has a really strong component to it. To be honest, if we weren't improving our genetics, I know the industry's not in great shape at the moment, but we'd be in even worse shape.
You mentioned carcass traits. What about wool?
So wool is a tricky one, right? And as Beef and Lamb New Zealand, our farmers have given us the no vote for a wool levy, and that happened probably 15 years ago now. So wool doesn't technically come under our remit. Now we do have a wool evaluation, and people can feed data into it. It's not universal that people do, so a lot of breeders are choosing not to feed wool into that evaluation. But the other side of wool, right, is that some breeders are going the other way and taking the wool off sheep so that we don't need to shear them. And, that's a new area of focus in terms of there are new breeds that we need to be able to cope with and help in the evaluation.
Yeah, I did see a couple of Wiltshire stud breeders lingering here just before. I guess they fit into that equation.
Yeah, Wiltshires, but there's also other breeds that don't grow wool in the first place as well, right? So yeah. I guess someone used the term to us today about non-shearing sheep, and I think that's quite a good term because it captures both the shedding but also the sheep that haven't grown wool in the first place.
Yes. With climate change and changing market requirements, what does the ideal sheep of the future look like?
Great question. And I don't know if there's one single answer to that, right? So I think just to go back to that wool thing in terms of the sheep of the future, I think our industry is going to go three ways. One is there'll be some breeders that stay with the strong wool. There'll be some breeders that take the wool right off. And then fining up the clip is another strategy that another group will probably take. For the future, the sheep of the future is going to have to do all the things that it does today, but we're also going to have to address issues like welfare. A right to farm animals is going to become an increasing thing in the future. And then, of course, there's the methane question, and there's a lot of pressure. I've done some international travel, quite a bit of international travel recently. Everywhere you go, people are talking about reducing methane outputs from sheep, or sheep and cattle and dairy cattle and other animals. It's not a New Zealand thing, it's a world thing.
Let's go into that shed there because it's starting to rain quite heavily, and I've still got a couple of questions I want to ask. Ooh, driving rain. Now, we've just come into a work shed here to get out of the rain. Jason, how are genetic improvements made?
Essentially, it comes down to measuring animals, and so that you know what performance they are, and then selecting them. And we've got a whole lot of tools that we help breeders with, which turn measurements of animals, turn information onto pedigrees, and then information on genotypes. So we do the DNA tests on all these animals, and we turn them into predictions as to which is going to be the best animal to breed from in the future. And that tool is used in pretty much every major livestock industry around the world. And, without doubt, it's demonstrated to be a really important component in making rapid genetic gain as fast as we can.
But nonetheless, it still must take a bit of time because this is a generational thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So genetics is, we talk about it as making cumulative and permanent gains. So every gain that we make in a year is not transformational, right? It might be 1%, 2%. But then next year we make another 1 or 2%. The year after we make a 1 or 2%, and that all stacks up. And after 10 years, you've actually made some significant change. And so it's a building block. But the great thing is once you've made that permanent gain step, that stays with you. You don't have to keep paying for it. As opposed to, we can make gains by feed supplements or something like that. For example, we've got to pay the cost of that every time we do it.
What are the biggest challenges facing breeders at the moment?
Well, right now, you'd have to say across the sheep industry, it's profitability. Costs have gone up, our prices are at a real low, and people are hurting. There's going to be a lot of people making a loss this year, so that's a challenge. Hopefully that's a temporary challenge. We're going to have to work our way out of that, and that's not easy. But, that bigger picture around our environmental performance, our sustainability, and our social licence to be able to farm animals. I'm not saying it's an emergency, but it's a significant factor that we're going to have to think about in the future.
It's standing with me trying to keep dry is sheep breeder Hamish Biddy. Where are you from, Hamish?
From Waipakarau, a little town just out of Waipak, Ong is where, so central Hawke's Bay, up under the ranges. Yep.
You've really hit some fine Canterbury weather.
It's beautiful. Coming from the east coast, I mean, we've had this for the last couple of weeks, so it's, we haven't done too bad. Yeah.
Were you affected on your farm?
Not majorly affected. I mean, like we had 110 mils in a day and a half at home and 170 on another block that we got out by the coast, but no slipping or damage. It's too early in the winter yet. The ground's not that wet, so we're pretty lucky. But you feel for Wairau and Gisborne.
Yes. And so why have you come down to this year's Sheep Breeders Forum?
So I enjoy coming down to this because I get to meet and mingle with other breeders, listen to the science team as to what's happening, where we're going, and the future of what we're to expect in the next couple of years with rolling out new data, analysing, etc.
Yes.
But it's just a really good mix and mingle with everybody.
And lots of good learnings this year?
Lots of good learnings, quite a positive vibe on all the new improvements that they're doing within genetic evaluations, where we're going on the methane work, feed efficiencies and other,
Yeah, I was just talking to Jason before and he said that methane is quite a big issue.
Yes, methane's the big one for the future, so to know that we've got a clear plan and where we're going and how we're rolling it out is really positive, I think, for the industry.
Yes. What sort of sheep do you breed?
So we breed a composite. Kelso composite is, we're one of the original composite breeds in New Zealand, and it's a 3-4-way cross type animal looking for maternal traits that are really good for reproduction, growth, meat and health traits.
So due to the low, strong wool prices, do you tend to focus mainly on carcass traits?
Yeah, we do concentrate mostly on carcass traits and our health traits, but wool is still an important factor to a sheep. So we concentrate on trying to make a sheep that is uniform of wool as we can get it, so it is still valuable at the other end for somebody. Yeah. But we also want that wool to be a healthy wool, which means it's not going to produce dags, it's not going to get fly blown. So we select for dag score, we make sure the style and fleece is right to the environment so it doesn't become a cost. So you still have to make selection on wool.
What are some of the traits that your sheep farmer clients are looking for at the moment?
Right now, the big push, the last 4 years, it's been facial eczema. Everyone was on that bandwagon. We haven't had too much lately, but the worm feck has probably become the number one asked question is, what are we doing about worms?
It must be quite challenging working on issues like worms through a breeding program.
It is challenging, but it is actually a highly heritable trait. So the beauty of coming to these days, we talk to the scientists how to implement, we meet other farmers who are doing a good job, and the beauty of being a composite like we are, we can go and find the best genetics from any stud and bring it into our program.
That was Hawke's Bay sheep breeder Hamish Bibby. Cosmo was also talking to Matt Iremonger from Willesden Farms and Dr. Jason Archer from Beef and Lamb New Zealand's genetics team.